Yo, goons. What's good? So let's just quickly go over the Season 2 changes for Goldlewis and talk a little bit about how he was affected and kind of where he maybe went relative to the tier list and everything like that. So the average character definitely got buffed by all the changes in the balance patch. Goldlewis did not get buffed, definitely overall nerfs for this character. But they're not as bad as you might think, so let's get into a little bit about what they specifically were, what the things are that affects Goldlewis. So before getting into Goldlewis specific changes, the biggest thing by far that affects this character this patch is not the drone change, it's actually the scaling change. So all of Goldlewis's BTs that previously had 100% proration now have 90%. Now what people might not know, and I didn't know myself for a little bit actually, which is why I held off on this video, is that not all of his BTs had 100% proration pre-patch as it was. Only the ones that had 100% went to 90% and even changed at all. The other ones didn't. So 842 and 268, these BTs, his lows, they already had 90% proration, and the overheads, 842 and 486, they already had 80% proration. So those didn't change, and only base scaling changes affected damage output this patch, barring specific nerfs like Ramreka. So in other words, if you get a combo starter with anything that wasn't a mid BT, like a 684 and 624 or 268, then your combo is going to be doing the same damage as it was before. But those combos that do start with these ones, they will all be dealing about 10% less damage than they were pre-patch. And for certain routes, especially optimal routes, that kind of sucks. So I'll give you a bit of an example. So even though technically all of Goldlewis's routes that started with 268 or counter hit 268 went down by around 10% damage, that affects some routes more than others because you could actually get way higher damage with optimal routes and especially gun routes in the corner using 268. And part of the reason why that change kind of hurts a lot is that the gun doesn't add scaling to your combo. And that was the idea with the old route in the corner, which is that you're doing your counter hit 268, 100% scaling, and then your gun, and all the gun damage you're getting pre-patch was for free basically. And so that could allow you to get easy TODs. Well, not easy, but you could find TODs off of that. Now they're really going to be only doing around 80-ish% to certain characters, but if you have them in the corner, that means they've probably already taken some damage, taken some chip damage, and they're going to likely be dead anyway. That scenario doesn't hurt as much, but the gun combos are definitely hit as a result of your 268 starters now having scaling, because now that gun damage is also scaled. And that's just one example of something kind of blowing. And of course, you know, very basic routes like this kind of thing, they all do less damage now. They all do less than they would have before. And it's a little unfortunate, but our character is still such high damage that even if we lost 10% all around and not just off of those starters, we would still be in a fine scenario. And bear in mind that losing 10% on 684 only really matters on RC, because most of the time you're going to just be hit confirming 684 or ending a combo with 684. Same with 624. You know, you don't need to choose to start combos on those. In fact, now you can just take the knockdown and use the meter on some kind of mix-up anyway. The only time it kind of sucks is where you would have been able to kill with an RC before and you can't anymore. That's unfortunate, but at the end of the day, the scaling changes are what affects him most, and ultimately they're not super significant, I think. So 5H, 6H, and 2H also all went to 90% proration from 100, and this is kind of a universal change, and it affects most characters way worse than it affects Goldlewis, because you never get combo starters with 5H and 2H. Like, if you're doing that, it's a misinput, and you got lucky. 6H, sometimes, but again, if you're getting a full combo started with 6H, usually it's a counter hit, and usually they're going to be dead anyway, even with that 10% change. So yeah, if you're in a scenario where you got a counter hit 6H to start off with, which is really the only time you're going to be getting combos off of this, because 6H should not be hitting raw in the corner very often, they're still going to be dead. So it shouldn't be that significant. But again, it can make the difference between killing the opponent and getting a wall break with positive bonus pretty rarely, I would say. But I mean, we're still winning most of the time. Ultimately, I don't think it's that significant. Someone like Sol or Kai losing 5H and 6H proration, though, I mean, that's a different story. That affects them much more, and that's kind of something that I think ultimately benefits Goldlewis, is that our damage actually didn't go down quite as much as a lot of other characters, surprisingly. Although, in terms of absolute amount of damage dealt, ours went down just because our combos did more damage, but in terms of proportionate to the amount of damage the character is doing, we lost a decent amount, but many other characters lost more. So moving on to the Goldlewis specific changes, he did get a couple of nice things, so let's kind of talk about the more significant ones first. So the JH change is really great. Basically, they lowered the hitbox on Goldlewis's JH, and they also increased its size behind him, which makes crossing up, crouching, and low profiling opponents possible now. Sometimes it just wouldn't be possible pre-patch to go for this kind of thing, and now it is, which is great. So like Axel 2K, Jacko 2K, or the low crouchers like Anji, Geo. This is much more consistent. Now all you have to do is kind of delay your JH a little bit, and you can even do stuff like this. You can do same side mix-ups, and you can do cross-up mix-ups with delay JHs. And of course, because you're hitting lower to the ground, you're going to be more plus, and so it's going to be easy to like get a close slash and pick up your pressure. It's very nice. Very, very nice change on the JH. And of course, my personal favorite change is the beam change. All versions of beam got 5 hits added to them. So it used to be 5, 10, and 15 per level of security. Now it is 10, 15, 20. So in other words, half security beam now is full security beam pre-patch, which is huge. That is so nice, and I believed this before, but now I really believe that beam is an amazing tool. If you get it out against zoners now, especially with full security, they're literally guaranteed to come to you full screen. Look at that. And by the way, they can't mash, they can't combo you. Past a certain point, they have to drop their combo and block. They have to, even if they burn RC to do it. Or they have to get a wall break or throw, or some kind of invulnerability all the way through the beam. But it's basically impossible, which means you throw it out and you can just start mashing pretty much. And a lot of the time, people still just run into like a 6-2-4 that you throw out. Once you beam, you can 6H, and while they're getting dragged to you, you can throw out a mix-up. Now, 6H has a very large cancel window. You can basically cancel it at any point during the move, which is very, very nice for that kind of situation. You can see right there, I delayed it so much. If they're far enough, you can even get like a double mix-up like that and stay plus. Now, the value is incredible on this beam, especially on the full security version. If you can get it out, you can go for cross-ups at the end of it using your new JH. You can go for any mix-up you can basically imagine that is meterless. One thing I think is going to be the future of Goldlewis, if we find a way to set up the back turn BTs off of the beam, because that's a disgusting mix-up, obviously. And I think it's probably possible. It's just kind of hard to do with timing. But anyway, it's a bit of a tangent. If you want to see more beam tech, I would recommend checking out Backpack's video, who uploaded it, I think, on the day or one day after the patch. I'll link it in the description. So they added a stagger effect to Goldlewis's 5k on counter hit, which is basically when you're put in that state that you have to push a button in order to be able to act. That lasts 14 frames. That's not significant. It means that we cannot do a counter hit 5k into 486 or 426 like many of us were hoping. Those are blue combos. It means Faust could have blocked. He had time to, if you tech as soon as possible, which pretty much any competent opponent is going to do. But what does work now that wouldn't always work before, 5k, CAR 268 from further ranges, and 5k 842. Sometimes you do these in pressure, but if the 5k connected on a counter hit, it just wouldn't combo. Yeah, and that was unfortunate, but I mean, hey, you know, now these kinds of things work sometimes where they wouldn't before, but it's unfortunately a very insignificant change. A not insignificant change is going to be what happened to our poor drone, however. So they made it that drone disappears on hit at any security level now for Goldlewis, and that actually counts YRCs and techs, which is a little bit unfortunate. So for example, if I throw out my drone here and I just walk at Faust, sadly, that drone is just going to die on me, and that's just really sad. It means you have to play your approach a lot more carefully though, and you know what, that's okay. I think that's a fine change. We all know drone was overtuned, but also they made it so that level 0 drone does not knock down, it just hits the opponent and probably leaves you a little bit plus. I don't know how plus though on hit. Level 2 drone, soft knockdown, just like Season 1. Level 3 drone is still hard knockdown though, so that's very nice, which means that you can still use it in scary situations like this. You know, the opponent's still going to be locked in there, and they're still going to have to hold mix-ups. Even with level 2 drone, you can make that kind of thing still work. Not all that bad. What really sucks is this situation happening though. You pull out your drone and you run in and you get hit. And even if the drone had started connecting, as long as there's any kind of hit that goes through, the drone will disappear. Which is a bummer, but it needed a nerf. Let's be honest. But Skyfish is great, and Beam is great as well. And I think if you have decent neutral anyway, you didn't need drone. You shouldn't have relied on it. At a high enough level, people have good counterplay around the drone, just used in neutral anyway. And so its main purpose, which is as an offensive tool, is still around. So, you know, I can still do something like this and go for my back turn and go for my schmicks and whatnot. As long as the drone meaties, it's basically the same as before if it's level 3. And even if you're in the corner, if it's level 2, it's also basically the same as before, except for this scenario. So you can see now the drone just disappears in that situation, which is a bummer. It used to stay there after tech and you just get a free turn. And it was really obnoxious. That's probably like the most significant offensive spot that got changed by drone. But overall, that's still a good mix-up because very few people were learning to tech that anyway. Most people will try to jump it. And the drone, of course, still lingers in the corner. You know, it'll still kind of just sit here, which is great. It's still very useful. So all in all, I don't think Goldlewis was hit too hard, but relative to the rest of the cast, he was hit pretty damn hard. Most characters got either buffs or basically stayed the same. And Goldlewis really got kind of minor buffs, but the damage went down at a pretty decent amount compared to other characters, just again because we did so much. 10% of our damage is much more than 10% of Bridget's damage. And some characters, like Bridget, speaking of whom, their damage went up. They got better conversions, like Axel and Geo, even in light of the scaling changes. Goldlewis wasn't one of those. And we also have to see how his matchups change. That's something that we're going to need time to evaluate. Off the top of my head, I will say this, though. I think that Axel went from Goldlewis favored to either even or slight Goldlewis losing. Happy Chaos basically didn't change. Testament got worse. Bridget got worse. Geo got worse. And May got worse. Those are like all the major ones, I think, that were affected. Nago obviously got a lot better. Chip basically stayed the same. Biken basically stayed the same. Leo got a little bit worse, basically stayed the same. Soul basically stayed the same. Kai basically stayed the same. Anji basically the same. Pot basically the same. And that more or less covers most of the characters that you'd ever see in tournament. Testament is going to be a nightmare for this character now, though. That I firmly stand by. Anyway, that's just the thoughts off the top of my head. We'll have to see how things play out throughout the rest of the season. I think this character is still perfectly good, and there's no reason to doom or drop him. He's great. If you played him because you enjoy swinging, but enjoy doing big damage, cool combos and whatnot, he's still the character for you. Nothing really changed on that front. So yeah, just all goons.